The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek, its golden light filtering through the windows of McKenna's restaurant like honey through cheesecloth. Sarah McKenna moved between the worn wooden tables with practiced grace, her calloused hands arranging wildflowers in mason jars, each movement deliberate and purposeful. The scent of fresh coffee and bacon grease hung in the air, mingling with the sage and dust that seemed permanently woven into everything in this harsh corner of the territory. 6 months had passed since Thomas died. 6 months since the fever took him and left her with nothing but this small restaurant and the weight of his dreams pressing against her chest like a stone. The townspeople whispered behind her back, wondering how long a woman alone could possibly survive running a business in a place where even strong men struggled to make their mark. Sarah paused at the window, watching the empty street stretch toward the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, travelers were making their way toward Copper Creek, some bringing hope, others carrying trouble. She had learned to read the signs in the dust clouds and the way the wind shifted, lessons taught by necessity and sharpened by solitude. I wonder where in the world you might be right now, perhaps watching your own morning unfold. What time is it where you are, and what does your sky look like today? The restaurant bell above the door chimed softly in the morning breeze, a sound that had once brought comfort, but now carried uncertainty. The distant rumble reached Sarah's ears before the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, a low growling sound that seemed to make the very air tremble. She set down her coffee cup and stepped onto the wooden porch, her hand instinctively smoothing her apron as she watched 5 riders approach the town at a reckless pace. These were not the usual travelers who passed through Copper Creek. Their horses were lathered with sweat and foam, their riders slouched in their saddles with the careless arrogance of men who believed themselves above consequence. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the glint of metal on their gun belts and the way they rode as though the entire world owed them passage. The lead rider was a bear of a man with a beard that reached his chest, his leather vest hanging open to reveal a stomach that spoke of too much whiskey and too little honest work. Behind him rode 4 others, each carrying themselves with the same swagger, their eyes already scanning the town like vultures searching for carrion. They pulled up first at Henderson's general store, and Sarah watched as old Mr. Henderson emerged onto his porch with the careful politeness of a man who had learned to read danger in the set of a stranger's shoulders. The conversation was brief, punctuated by harsh laughter that carried across the street like the crack of a whip. Mrs. Patterson hurried past with her young daughter, pulling the child close when one of the riders called out something that made the woman's cheeks flush red with shame and anger. The men found this amusing, their laughter following the woman down the street. The restaurant door burst open with such force that the little bell above it rang like a fire alarm, its cheerful chime now sounding desperate and shrill. The 5 men filled the doorway like a wall of unwashed leather and malice, their spurs jangling against the wooden floor with each deliberate step. "Good morning, gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice steady as mountain stone despite the way her pulse quickened. She moved behind the counter with measured steps, placing the solid wood between herself and her unwelcome visitors. "What can I get for you today?" The bearded leader surveyed the modest restaurant with obvious disdain, his small eyes taking in the mismatched chairs, the hand-sewn curtains, and the simple wooden tables that Thomas had built with his own hands during their first year of marriage. His gaze lingered on Sarah with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. Well, he drawled, his voice thick with mockery. "Ain't this a pretty little setup? We'll have whatever slop you're serving, woman, and make it fast. We got places to be and no time to waste on your frontier hospitality." His companions spread out across the small dining area, their boots leaving muddy prints on the clean floor that Sarah had scrubbed before dawn. One of them knocked over a chair with his elbow, then laughed when it crashed to the floor. Another helped himself to a biscuit from the basket on the counter, taking a large bite and chewing with his mouth open like an animal. "The coffee's fresh," Sarah replied, moving toward the stove with calm precision. "Bacon and eggs will be ready shortly." The situation deteriorated with the speed of a summer storm. While Sarah worked at the stove, the men grew bolder, their voices rising as they made crude jokes and swept dishes from the tables with deliberate carelessness. The sound of breaking crockery filled the air like gunshots, each crash another small violation of the sanctuary she had worked so hard to maintain. "Hey woman," the bearded leader called out, his chair scraping against the floor as he pushed back from the table. "This coffee tastes like dishwater. You trying to poison us or just too stupid to make a decent cup?" The others laughed, emboldened by their leader's cruelty. One of them stood and deliberately knocked over the mason jar of wildflowers Sarah had arranged that morning, sending water and petals cascading across the table and onto the floor she had scrubbed clean before sunrise. Sarah turned from the stove, her hands steady as she faced them. "The coffee is fresh," she said quietly. "Perhaps your palate is accustomed to something stronger than what decent people drink in the morning." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. The leader's face darkened, his small eyes narrowing to slits as he processed what she had just said. Around him, his companions fell silent, sensing the shift in the air like animals before a thunderstorm. "You got a smart mouth for a woman alone," he said, rising slowly from his chair. His hand drifted toward the gun at his hip with practiced ease. "Maybe somebody needs to teach you some manners about how to talk to your betters." Sarah's hand moved to the worn wooden spoon at her waist, a simple gesture that spoke of habits formed long before she became a restaurant owner in this dusty frontier town. The men saw only a woman with flour on her apron, but they could not see the years she had spent beside Thomas on the trail, learning to read the language of violence in men's eyes and the weight of necessity in desperate times. "My betters," she repeated softly, her voice carrying the kind of quiet that comes before lightning strikes. "I see 5 men who rode into my establishment without invitation, destroyed my property without cause, and now threaten a woman who has shown them nothing but hospitality." The bearded leader took a step closer, his boots crunching on the broken pottery scattered across the floor. Behind him, his companions shifted restlessly, sensing something in Sarah's stillness that their leader had missed entirely. Thomas had taught her many things during their years together: how to read tracks in the dust, how to preserve meat through the harsh winter months, how to identify the plants that healed and those that harmed. But most importantly, he had taught her that sometimes the only way to survive was to become more dangerous than the danger facing you. As I watch these men underestimate what stands before them, I wonder about the strength that might be hidden in each of you watching from around the world. What time is it where you are? And what quiet power do you carry that others might not see? The air in the restaurant grew thick with unspoken threats and possibilities that none of them yet fully understood. The breaking point arrived like a crack of thunder on a clear day. The bearded leader grabbed the edge of Sarah's carefully crafted counter, the one Thomas had sanded smooth with his own hands during the long winter evenings when they had dreamed of this place together. With a grunt of effort, he shoved it hard enough to send the remaining dishes sliding toward the floor in a cascade of shattering ceramic. "That's enough," Sarah said, and something in her voice made even the boldest of the men pause. She stepped around the counter with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move quickly when survival depended on it. "You've destroyed my property, threatened my person, and shown disrespect to my establishment. It's time for you to leave." The leader laughed, but the sound held less confidence than before. "Or what, woman? You gonna make us? A little thing like you against 5 grown men?" Sarah's eyes swept across the restaurant, taking inventory of what remained whole and what lay broken on the floor. 6 months of building this life, 6 months of honoring Thomas's memory with every meal served and every customer welcomed. And these men had destroyed it in minutes simply because they could. She moved to the kitchen door and lifted something from a hook on the wall, her movements deliberate and unhurried. When she turned back to face them, the object in her hands caught the morning light streaming through the windows, and for the first time since entering her restaurant, the 5 men looked uncertain about what they had stumbled into. The cleaver in Sarah's hand was not the delicate kitchen tool these men expected to see. It was forged iron, heavy and well-balanced, its edge honed to razor sharpness through years of practical use. Thomas had crafted it himself during their first winter together, when they had lived off what they could hunt and trap in the unforgiving wilderness. "Now, gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had faced down wolves and survived blizzards that claimed weaker souls. "You have a choice to make. You can walk out that door with your dignity intact, or you can discover exactly what kind of woman you've chosen to threaten." The bearded leader's hand moved toward his gun, but Sarah was already in motion. Years of butchering game and preparing meals had given her an intimate knowledge of anatomy, of where bone met sinew and how quickly steel could part flesh from bone. She brought the cleaver down on the wooden table beside her with a thud that echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. The blade sank 3 inches into the hardwood, quivering there like an exclamation point at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish reading. As these men begin to understand their mistake, I find myself wondering about your own moments of unexpected strength. Where are you experiencing this story from tonight, and what would you do if your peaceful space was suddenly threatened? The restaurant had become a battlefield, and for the first time, the invaders were beginning to realize they might not emerge victorious. The tables had turned with the finality of a judge's gavel. Where moments before the 5 men had swaggered with the confidence of predators. Now they stood frozen like deer who had suddenly realized the hunter's rifle was trained upon them. The bearded leader's hand hovered over his gun. But something in Sarah's eyes warned him that drawing it would be the last mistake he ever made. You see, Sarah continued, working the cleaver free from the wood with a twist of her wrist. When my husband and I came to this territory, we learned very quickly that survival depends on understanding exactly who you're dealing with. Some folks mistook our politeness for weakness. They didn't make that mistake twice. She moved around the table with fluid precision, and the men found themselves backing toward the door without consciously deciding to retreat. There was something primal in the way she carried herself now, like a mother wolf protecting her den, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The youngest of the group, barely more than a boy despite his swagger, stumbled backward over an overturned chair. His face had gone pale beneath the dirt and stubble, and his eyes darted between Sarah and the door like a trapped animal seeking escape. Now, Sarah said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from facing down death and emerging victorious, "You're going to pay for what you've broken, apologize for your behavior, and walk out that door. Or you can test whether this cleaver is as sharp as it looks. Your choice, gentlemen." The transformation was complete and irreversible. The bearded leader, who had entered the restaurant like a conquering king, now stood with his shoulders hunched and his eyes fixed on the floor. His companions clustered behind him like sheep seeking shelter from a storm. Their earlier bravado evaporated like morning mist under the desert sun. "Ma'am," the leader stammered, his voice stripped of its former arrogance. We didn't mean no real harm. Just having a bit of fun, you understand." Sarah regarded him with the cold assessment of someone who had learned to judge character in the span of a heartbeat. "Fun," she repeated, her tone suggesting she found the word distasteful. "You called destroying a woman's livelihood fun? Breaking dishes that took months to replace? Threatening someone who offered you hospitality?" The youngest member of the group stepped forward, fumbling in his vest pocket. "Here, ma'am," he said, his voice cracking like an adolescent boy's. "I got some coins. For the dishes and such. We're real sorry about the mess." One by one, the others followed suit, digging into their pockets and placing crumpled bills and silver coins on the nearest unbroken table. Their movements were hurried and desperate, like men paying tribute to avoid execution. Sarah watched them with the patience of someone who understood that real power lay not in violence, but in the certainty that violence was always an option. The cleaver remained steady in her hand, its presence a reminder of consequences they no longer wished to test. The final confrontation arrived with the weight of inevitability. Sarah counted the coins and bills scattered across the table, her practiced eye calculating the value against the damage done. The amount fell short as she had expected it would, but money was not the only debt these men owed. "This covers about half of what you've destroyed," she said, gathering the payment with one hand while keeping the cleaver visible in the other. "But there's still the matter of your behavior toward the other folks in this town. Mrs. Patterson and her daughter, Mr. Henderson at the general store." The bearded leader's face flushed red beneath his whiskers. "Now see here, woman, we paid you fair and square. You can't hold us accountable for every little thing that happened before we got here." Sarah's smile was as sharp as the blade in her hand. "Can't I? This is my town, gentlemen. These are my neighbors and my friends. When you chose to ride through here spreading fear and disrespect, you made it my business." She moved closer, and they instinctively retreated toward the door. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the cleaver's edge, sending patterns of reflected steel dancing across the walls like warnings written in light. From wherever you're watching this unfold, I wonder if you've ever had to stand up for more than just yourself. What time is it in your corner of the world, and who would you protect if the need arose? The moment of final reckoning had arrived, and everyone in the room understood that what happened next would determine how this story ended. The resolution came not with violence, but with the kind of quiet victory that echoes longer than any gunshot. The 5 men backed toward the door with the careful steps of people who had finally understood the gravity of their situation. Outside, Sarah could see faces pressed against windows as the townspeople gathered to witness the outcome of this confrontation. "We'll be moving on now, ma'am," the bearded leader said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Won't be any more trouble from us, you have our word on that." Sarah followed them to the door, the cleaver still in her hand but no longer raised in threat. "Your word," she said, testing the phrase like she might test the edge of a blade. "I suppose we'll see what that's worth. But understand this clearly, gentlemen. If I hear of you causing trouble in any town between here and wherever you're headed, I'll be coming to find you. And next time, I won't be nearly so hospitable. The youngest member of the group turned back as they reached their horses. Ma'am, he said, touching the brim of his hat with genuine respect. Thank you for the lesson. Some of us needed to learn it. Sarah watched from her doorway as they mounted their horses and rode out of Copper Creek. Their departure as hurried as their arrival had been arrogant. Around the town square, doors opened and people emerged from their hiding places, their faces showing a mixture of relief and newfound respect. The restaurant bell chimed softly in the breeze, and for the first time in months, Sarah heard music in that simple sound. The afternoon sun painted the restaurant in shades of gold and amber as Sarah swept the last fragments of broken pottery into a dustpan. Mrs. Patterson had arrived with her daughter to help clean, followed by Mr. Henderson and several other townspeople who had witnessed the morning's events from behind their windows and doors. Never seen anything quite like that, Mrs. McKenna, Henderson said, righting an overturned chair with careful hands. Those men thought they could ride roughshod over anyone they pleased. You showed them different. Sarah hung the cleaver back on its hook in the kitchen, where it belonged among the other tools of her trade. Thomas would have been proud, she thought, watching the familiar rhythm of neighbors helping neighbors restore order to chaos. The young woman who had seemed so vulnerable that morning had revealed herself to be something far more formidable, and the entire town had taken notice. Word would spread along the trading routes and through the territory about the restaurant owner in Copper Creek, who had faced down 5 armed men with nothing but courage and a sharp blade. As the last of the broken dishes was cleared away and new wildflowers arranged in mason jars, Sarah stood behind her counter and surveyed her domain. The scars on the wooden floor would remain as reminders, but they would heal over time, just as she had healed from her own wounds. As our story draws to a close, I'm curious about the communities you've built wherever you are in the world. What time is it now where you're watching, and who are the people who would stand with you when trouble comes calling? The restaurant bell chimed gently, welcoming whatever tomorrow might bring.